I'm Lynn, and welcome to the channel. Let me start with something you may have noticed. Tesla hasn't done much lately, but EcoStar suddenly jumped vertically. If that felt strange, it shouldn't, because the elephant in the room finally moved. That elephant is SpaceX. According to recent reports from Bloomberg and Barron's, SpaceX is quietly preparing for a possible IPO as early as 2026. And the valuation number being floated? Up to $1.5 trillion. Let's be very clear that's not big. That's reordering the global capital market big. At that level, SpaceX wouldn't just go public, it would instantly sit among the most valuable companies on Earth, almost like creating half an apple out of thin air. And here's the key point. Most people are still watching this like entertainment, but money doesn't watch, money moves. What we're seeing right now is a massive cognitive mismatch between headlines and capital flow. If SpaceX lists anywhere near $1 trillion, it won't just attract attention. It will act like a gravity well. Capital will be pulled out of other hard tech sectors, aerospace, telecom, even parts of AI, and sucked straight into one name. Institutions understand this. That's why they're not waiting for the IPO. They're hunting for substitutes. Not because they love those companies, but because they can't buy SpaceX yet. This brings us to EchoStar. EcoStar didn't suddenly invent something revolutionary. Its business didn't magically improve overnight. What changed is much simpler and much more powerful. EcoStar sold spectrum assets to SpaceX. In return, it received cash and SpaceX equity. That single transaction completely changed how the market sees EcoStar. Investors are no longer buying a legacy satellite TV company. They're buying a discounted liquid proxy for SpaceX. EcoStar effectively became a SpaceX derivative. Think of it like this. A farmer sells land to a developer. Instead of cash, he takes a small stake in the future skyscraper. From that moment on, his wealth no longer depends on crops. It depends on whether the building gets built. That's EcoStar today. And that's why it moves violently on SpaceX news. Here's the deeper question. Elon Musk has spent years saying SpaceX doesn't need to go public. Cash flow turned positive. Private funding was available, so why does the IPO rumor suddenly intensify now? The answer probably isn't Mars, it's currency. When SpaceX is private, its shares are illiquid. Hard to trade, hard to use strategically. But once it's public, especially at trillion-dollar scale, SpaceX stock becomes one of the most powerful acquisition currencies on the planet. Spectrum, data centers, telecom infrastructure, equity becomes leverage. Some analysts, including Dan Ives at Wedbush, have even suggested that Tesla could eventually gain indirect exposure to SpaceX through entities like xAI. If that happens, Tesla stops being just a car company. It becomes the liquidity hub of the Musk ecosystem. And that's why Tesla reacts every time SpaceX news leaks. So how do you justify a trillion-plus valuation? Not by counting rockets. Layer 1 is launch. Yes, SpaceX dominates, but launch is capital intensive. Margins have ceilings. If that were the whole story, SpaceX would be a very cool FedEx in space. Layer 2 is Starlink. Millions of users, monthly subscriptions, recurring revenue. Rockets are just the construction crew. Starlink is the toll booth. This alone starts to look like a global telecom utility. But telecom still doesn't get you to $1.5 trillion. That's where Layer 3 comes in. Here's the part most people underestimate. Reports suggest SpaceX, and even competitors like Blue Origin, are exploring orbital data centers. Why? Because AI on Earth has two massive constraints, energy and heat. In orbit, continuous solar power, natural thermal dissipation, no land, no grid bottlenecks. Imagine training AI models in space, then sending only the results back to Earth. That's not science fiction. That's a zero-gravity version of AWS. And if this works, SpaceX isn't just a launch company or a telecom company. It becomes infrastructure. The kind you don't notice, but can't live without. This is why capital is splitting into three main paths. Tesla is the ecosystem bet. You're betting that Musk's companies will remain interconnected, financially and technologically. EcoStar is the most direct proxy. High beta, high volatility. You're betting on SpaceX equity appreciation before the IPO. And then there's Rocket Lab. Counterintuitively, SpaceX getting bigger helps Rocket Lab. Why? Because governments hate single supplier risk. If SpaceX is iOS, Rocket Lab becomes Android. Not as dominant, but necessary. That makes it the anti monopoly hedge. Here's the mistake most investors make: they get the logic right, but the timing wrong. A SpaceX IPO is not a moment, it's an 18-month process. Before filing, proxies tend to run on rumors. After filings, reality hits. And around IPO week, money rotates into the real thing. Historically, that's when proxy assets are most vulnerable. Knowing where you are on the timeline matters more than picking the right name. Zoom out for a moment. For decades, space meant risk. National pride, money pits, something no pension fund wanted. But this moment feels different. If SpaceX does go public, it won't mark the beginning of space exploration. It will mark the moment space becomes boring infrastructure, like railroads, like electricity, like the internet backbone. When rockets turn into elevators, the real business finally starts at the top floor. Thanks for watching. I'm Lynn, and I'll see you at the next inflection point.